Now, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is the quintessential rapture passage. It's the most famous, most detailed. Everyone agrees that it's the rapture. All the pre-tribbers agree that it's the rapture. And they love to quote it. And they think in their warped understanding that somehow this provides a proof of a pre-tribulation rapture, even though in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, there's no timing given. There's no timing of the rapture given in 1 Thessalonians 4. He describes the rapture. He tells us that it's going to happen, but he doesn't give the timing until chapter 5, verse 1, which they won't even touch with a 10-foot pole. They love to just comfort one another all day long. They're just so busy comforting one another in chapter 4, verse 18. They never even make it to chapter 5. And the Bible says in verse 17, then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. But, see, there's this big but that they are not facing today. They won't even look at it. It's a conjunction. I mean, don't make me take you to conjunction junction to figure out what a conjunction is. I mean, it's not done. The book isn't over, right? And the most important stuff is coming in chapter 5 because he's going to explain to us the timing of the rapture, right? Because he says this, but of the times, I mean, isn't that pretty important? That sounds pretty relevant. I mean, we just finished explaining the rapture. Now we're going to talk about the timing. Great. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you. Why not? Why don't we need to know? For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. Now, how in the world do they know that the day of the Lord's coming as a thief in the night? Somebody must have taught them that. You know who taught them that? Jesus Christ taught them that. And this is what's so foolish about this idea of, oh, Jesus never taught on the rapture. That was only revealed to us through Paul. Paul's our apostle to the Gentiles and blah, blah. Really, if Paul's the apostle to the Gentiles, why did Jesus give the Great Commission to all the apostles and tell them to teach all nations? Right. He commanded every one of those disciples to go reach the Gentiles. They just refused to do it, most of them. That's not his fault. But the point is that it says right here that they already know perfectly that the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. Isn't that the exact illustration that Jesus taught in Luke 12 when he said he's coming like a thief? And if the goodman of the house would have known what time the thief was coming, he would have watched. You need to watch. Look, Jesus already taught the doctrine of the day of the Lord coming as a thief in the night. So he says, well, I don't need to tell you about the timing because Christ already taught you the timing. Right? You already have heard what Jesus taught in Matthew 24. You've heard what Jesus taught in Luke 12. You're familiar with what Jesus taught in Luke 21. You're familiar with what Jesus taught in Mark 13. And I'm not saying they had those written books, but they'd heard that teaching. They'd heard that preaching of Christ's words from the apostles. And so Paul says, well, you don't need me to tell you of the times and seasons, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. Now, let me ask you this. Is there any way possible to read these two verses and walk away saying that the day of the Lord is not the rapture? Because it wouldn't make any sense to tell us about the rapture and say, but of the times and seasons, you have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night, unless the timing of the day of the Lord is the same timing as the timing of the rapture. That's the only way that would make any sense. I mean, it would be like, let's say, Brother Segura and myself, right? We're going to be going to a soul-winning marathon in Timbuktu, right? And Brother Segura and I, we're both going to a soul-winning marathon in Timbuktu, and we're both planning to arrive on the same day. We're flying on the same flight. We're sitting next to each other all the way there. We're going to land, we're going to do our soul winning, we're going to preach, and then we're going to fly home again on the same exact flight, right? And then, what if I were to forward my itinerary to somebody in Timbuktu so that they could pick me up at the airport and know my schedule and know how to plan the event, right? And then if they say, well, you know, can you send me Brother Chris's itinerary as well? Well, you know what? Of the times and the seasons of Brother Chris Segura's arrival, you have no need that I write unto you, because I've already sent you my itinerary. Yeah. Now, what if we were on totally different flights and arriving at totally different days? Would that make any sense? If they said, send us Brother Chris's itinerary, we want to pick him up at the airport, and I said, well, you already have my itinerary. The only way that would make sense is if Chris and I are on the same plane. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? If Chris and I are on the same plane, then it makes sense. If you got the one itinerary, that's all you need. But if we were, that's the only way this verse makes any sense. He's saying, oh, the timing of the rapture? We already know that the day of the Lord's coming as a thief in the night. What does he mean by that? Of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you. You already know what to look for. You already know what's going on with the timing of the rapture. You don't need me to tell you, because you already know the day of the Lord's going to come as a thief in the night. Okay, everybody got that? Okay, well, what does the Bible say about the day of the Lord like 10 times? The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. Yep. So what has to happen before the day of the Lord? The sun and moon have to be darkened. Well, isn't that interesting that in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 it says that after the tribulation, sun and moon are darkened, and then Christ comes in the clouds to gather the elect. But you see, this is what I'm saying, people. It comes a point where people who refuse to see this are just liars at some point. At some point, they just have to be seen for what they are, a liar, who sees it and they know it and they just refuse to admit it because they're a liar, because they're a coward, because they want to be everybody's friend and everybody's buddy.